Welcome to the House of Lost Arts Fireside. I'm Brooke Golden. I'm an artist and guide helping women navigate inner landscapes as we move through the journey of our life and returning to our true nature. Today, I am sharing a little bit different of a take on my pregnancy and birth journey and story. As we find ourselves at the time of this recording, in some of the darkest days of winter, where we really draw within, and it really illuminates our intuition and our inner knowing and the things that we just sense and can feel. And this is really a feminine ability that we all possess and we all have access to, but we've kind of dimmed the importance, not just kind of, but like really dimmed the importance of that feeling, sensing, knowing side, and in favor of the logical thinking side, which we've prioritized in our modern world. So this really is a feminine ability that we have access to, and it is especially pronounced in pregnancy and birth and postpartum. And so today I'm speaking on my experience of really tapping it back into my intuition in pregnancy. So I'll try to be as concise as I can. I tend to ramble a little bit, so that is prone to happen because there's a lot of there's a lot of nuance and there's a lot of interconnected pieces. And so basically leading up to pregnancy, my story is I never wanted children. I grew up in a turbulent home environment, and it didn't feel, children didn't feel like something that was something that you would naturally desire or bring joy to your life. And so I had a lot of things from that upbringing to overcome. And I met my husband. We got married after 3 years. I started to kind of feel like biological urge, like to have kids, but I still had all this unpacking to do. So I started to think, once I got married, I started to think about having children. And then it took 4 years before I actually surrendered to there's just never going to be a right time. All the pieces are never going to line up. I'm never going to be 100% certain if this is even what I want. And so I'm just we're either going to do it or we're not. And so, and there were some other things, but we decided to go for it. And, I decided to listen to that urge that I had. So that was kind of the first little thing. I had a friend shared with me her experience, and it really landed with me. I don't want to live with regret. And I have this curiosity here. Obviously, I've been thinking about it for so long. So let's explore it. And so we got pregnant right away. And the other thing leading up to this was I'd always growing, just not only in the environment I grew up in, but also just cultural programming had led me to believe that, yes, that logical thinking side was so much more valuable, that somehow the masculine, right, was more respectable, I guess, in a way. And so for a while, and this ties into my career journey too, always wanted to be an artist, but that was devalued in our society, and it was clearly devalued in my family too. And I was encouraged to do something different. Our society told me I should do something different. So I'm very balanced in the set, my degrees in computer science, and I have this artistic creative side, and I'm able to access both sides. But I really placed extra value in my younger adulthood in like the more logical, that like more procedural thinking side of things versus like the creative, the intuitive, the go with the flow. And, if we want to attach that to the more of the feminine side. So I had a lot of programming around that too that I had to like move through. So going into pregnancy, I had worked through this like not wanting children because of what I thought it entailed, yet also having this like massive curiosity around like natural childbirth, raising children in a natural, connected way, and like super interested in like natural birth, midwives, breastfeeding, everything like kind of outside the system as it was. So naturally, I decided to experience it for myself. And well, after I worked through my stuff, and then moving into pregnancy too, I had begun to reclaim some of that feminine side, right? Like the valuing of the feminine, that we have men and women, masculine, feminine, have different qualities, and that doesn't make either one superior or inferior, right? And just claiming like our own natural tendencies, and by each individual as well. And so beginning to reclaim some of that too. What I didn't go, I wasn't as spiritual, right? I had spiritual curiosity as well, but I knew absolutely was not like anywhere interested in Christianity or any of the major religions, and still exploring that for myself. And so I wasn't really tuned into my intuition going into this, or that inner knowing. But what struck me about halfway through pregnancy was, so we decided we wanted to be like, I did not have an ultrasound with that pregnancy. I didn't need to know the gender of the baby. Like, it didn't matter to me, and I liked the surprise, the not knowing, right? And about halfway into the pregnancy, I realized, like, I just started having this like really strong knowing that I was carrying a girl. And both, it was hard for me to accept, but at the same time, I couldn't shake it. Like, it felt like fact to me. Like, there was no way to doubt it. It was like very strong. And that would be like during that pregnancy, I would say that was like the main intuitive thing. I had known, like, I'd already detached from, like, I never was into like the modern birth like narrative, and like going to I was using a birth center with midwives, and didn't have an ultrasound, and not even remotely interested in induction. Like, that was not even on my timeline. Like, birth is a natural process. Timeline, did I say timeline radar? That wasn't even something I was considering. Was not concerned with an induction. Was not even worried about like, I just knew, like, I'm just like, I know that first pregnancies tend to go past 40 weeks if we don't induce, and if we're not a part of the modern medical world. And so I had surrendered to that too. Like, I'm just like, she's just gonna come when she comes. And I was fully prepared to go past my due date. And so at the time, like, that didn't feel like intuitive to me. And now I can't even say for a fact that that wasn't intuition either, but that was just me like knowing that 40 weeks was just an arbitrary date, and I was likely to go past based on first births. And so I accepted that, and she did. I went into labor a week late, and it was a very long labor, and she ended up being born 10 days late past her due date, right? And her due date was not based on like an ultrasound or anything. It was based on, I have always had been tracking my cycle for like 4 or 5 years, and that was based on my like data that I had, not only my last missed period, but I knew when I ovulated. So I had that information. And so her due date was like based on my cycle versus like what a test told me. And so all of that in my first pregnancy. Now my second pregnancy rolled around and none of the fears were gone, right? Like my children are 4 years in between, and I knew I didn't want them like close, but I did wait a little longer because there was still that fear of like, what was life going to be like to add another? And we waited a while, and so still got pregnant pretty quickly. And this go around, I knew like, I'm like, okay, I knew we're again going to be surprised on gender. And I knew like, I knew in my first pregnancy that I hit that point where I just knew what the gender of the baby was going to be. And then I'm just like, okay, let's see if I can do it again. And so I just remained open to receiving that information. Like, how is it going to come through? When is it going to hit? I kind of remained curious about it. Like, kind of knew rough point. I think I was maybe like 25-ish weeks pregnant with my first when I had that like strong knowing that she was a girl. And the second one, now I'm having a hard time when it hit. I think it was later. I think it was closer to like 30 weeks. I didn't set any sort of timeline on it. I just remained curious. Like when, just listened to what wanted to come through. Am I going to have a boy or a girl? And came later, and I think it was about 30 weeks. And interestingly, I do think that both times it was in winter and around this time of year. So I think I was 20. It was late December, I think, with both of them. So I might have been further along with my son, my second one. Because sorry. I totally didn't even actually, like, I kind of had this awareness before, but as I'm speaking about it now, it just occurred to me that yes, it was at this time of year, the short days and the long nights when we're really like slowing down and we're drawn within, and it's dark outside and things are just more illuminated from within. So I know it was later in that pregnancy, which would have fallen closer to this time of year. And that's when I knew I was having a boy. And I was right again. So two for two. And also this pregnancy, and the second time I was pregnant, and this came earlier. I don't remember exactly when in the pregnancy, but it came earlier. I just had this feeling that he was going to come early. Okay. And I had a little different, like I didn't love my midwife. I didn't talk about this, but my midwife, like part of it was my own fault. Like I outsourced my power to in the first pregnancy, I really outsourced my power, expecting the midwives to really be my guide and like help tell me like where I read so much about pregnancy, the natural birth books, but still there was just those phases of labor and whatnot. And I expected my midwives to be able to tell me where I was at. And it was a long, unexpected labor and all sorts of things. And first labor, just hard when you haven't been through it, right? And you don't have that as much wisdom. Once you've been through it, it's a whole different thing. My second go around, yeah. So I didn't like there were other things, and I'll talk more about my birth stories later, that just didn't settle well with me. And so this is another intuitive thing that I forgot about. We have very limited birth options, and there are not midwives who do home births where I live. And so, and the hospital is over an hour away, which obviously is not like what I wanted anyways. So that's where I ended up with the midwife at the birth center, like almost 3 hours away with my first. And then with my second, like was not happy with them, at the same time limited options. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm making an appointment with them. So I made the appointment at 12 weeks and I went and I signed up, and I am not like, my intuition was just like, no, no, no. Like, it felt so wrong. And so I canceled with them, and I ended up finding, there was now for the second birth, there was a new midwife who practiced at the hospital, and I met her and she seemed in line with my beliefs. And so I went with that, and I was going to try for a natural hospital birth. And there's all sorts of things around that, which I won't go into. But so there were like 3 intuitive things I had with my second pregnancy. There was the hit that it was a no to use the birth center again. There was knowing he was a boy. And then the other thing that came even before knowing he was a boy is knowing he was going to come early. So, or that feeling he was going to come early. So having using a midwife in the hospital, I had a little different, like, I knew what my actual due date was, like, based on, I still had my dates again, because I had been tracking. I knew when I last bled, I knew my ovulation date, and I knew my due date. And she put me at 4 days earlier. And then then the due date I had calculated based on my date. So I just always held like the due date that I knew as my due date, and I just let them keep their due date. I didn't push it, because they also don't let you go past 2 weeks past your due date. I didn't feel I needed to push it because I had that feeling he was going to come early. And so he did. He came 5 days before their I went into labor 5 days before their due date. He was born 4 days before their due date, which put him like 8-9 days early before my due date. And so I was right with that, like my logical mind, when I had that feeling that he was going to come early, it wanted to tell me, oh no, his sister came like 10 days late. So he has an odds of being late too. But my intuition was right. And in a way, like that one, that was new to me. So I didn't fully accept it, but I had that strong feeling and I couldn't shake it. Like I didn't push the due date that my midwife had put down, because I knew I didn't need to. But at the same time, I had a hard time like really accepting it that he was going to come early, but he did. So third pregnancy rolls around, like the same thing. Still, like by this time, so with my second pregnancy, I had found my spiritual path. I was like pretty spiritually inclined, but I was doing more like in the sense of like setting up my birth space as sacred, and doing like, I did some birth art and of my own birth affirmations that I created, and really set the tone with music and playlists and candles and all the things, and going for a natural birth. And then like by my third pregnancy, like even more deeply spiritual, having more data around my intuition and how accurate it is in pregnancy. And then having had the bad experience with the birth center, having had like my midwife at the hospital was fine enough, but the hospital environment was like a no for me. And all sorts of other things, like everything. Like my second birth was like right before COVID, like less than a month before they shut everything down. And there's a whole other thing with that too. I will add that. This is a quick thing. So my husband and I I had a very early miscarriage before my second pregnancy, and we waited another month, and we were going to wait another month to try again. I was just observing my cycles and seeing what, it meant. Like, seriously, like, I even needed to take a test. Like, I knew I was pregnant, and then a couple days passed, and then it was like, no, things happened. And then it was so early. I'm like, I don't think I need to wait, but like, maybe I do. We'll give it some cycles and see. I was watching, one cycle passed, another one came, and I'm like, I know we're supposed to wait another cycle, but I just have this strong intuition, like, why? So we didn't wait, and I'm glad we didn't wait, because if we had waited, he would have been born right when they shut everything down, and that would have been a disaster. So anyways, there was that too. I forgot about that intuition, at least in relation to, I didn't forget about that. I just forgot about it in relation to this, what I'm sharing with you today. So back to my third pregnancy. Yes. So very more like in touch with my spirituality and timeline, like, feeling when things are right. Okay. And knowing, and getting less concerned with like, well, we have to wait for this or we have to wait for that, and all the things need to be right and in their place, and just like, it's more of the surrender to what is right for us and our family. And at that point, I read Spirit Babies. I was like doing more of like the preconceptual spiritual prep, and awaiting the timelines, allowing things to be as they were meant to be. And I have to say, I do feel like, having these experiences and not knowing what my birth option was next was also kind of terrifying, and like impacting my choice, like things with getting pregnant again. And when we did get pregnant, I had no idea what I was going to do. Like, none at all. I didn't know what... Like, I knew I wasn't going to go to the birth center. And again, I knew I didn't want to do the hospital. Got pregnant, started making some calls with midwives in the area to see, since my previous pregnancies, I had heard about like a midwife who attended a birth here. And then I heard about a woman who had a home birth, another woman who had a home birth here, and with different midwives. And so I began to make some calls, and I struck out with like one of them because I was having a winter baby and she wouldn't travel the distance during the winter, and I get it. I met with the other one. I didn't vibe with her at all. Or I should say I called her. I discussed over the phone. I did end up meeting her too, but I still didn't like vibe, and was starting to... I met with her later after I'd made like my birth decisions, because I thought maybe I needed another option, and I decided like no. But I did speak with a friend who's a doula, and she helped me tap into not so much the knowing. Yeah, this was not so much the intuition at this point, but just like, what did I want, right? In making the decision on how I was going to birth, and coming back to my power. And it just like, I wanted a home birth, and I didn't feel right inviting in someone into my space that wasn't a good fit, because I'd been there before. I did the birth center, which should have been a good environment, but the midwives were not a good fit for me. And so I ultimately ended up deciding to do it unassisted, and I even talked with the midwife, and she brought it up that maybe I could do unassisted since it was my third, and that like she could be there like in contact if I needed anything, or if I want her to come after the birth to help with the paperwork for the baby and whatnot. And ultimately I decided to go with that. And the level of connecting with my inner knowing and my intuition that was required to do that was a new level. And it was great, because it required that I like go fully into my intuition to a whole new other level. When I had already learned to trust my intuition, now I was being asked to take it even further and ask, is this the right thing? Is bait like, is everything good with my baby, that like I can do this at home on my own, a ways away from a hospital if anything were to arise. And I just kept I kept going, consulting my intuition and going within, and time again it was just like, yes, everything is fine, this is the right thing, like keep going. And this was early on, so this was in the summer. And so that was the first step. And again, 2 pregnancies that I had intuitively knew the gender. Again, we weren't going to find out the gender. It doesn't matter to us. We love to be surprised. We love that it's just a natural part of the process to not know what you're having. And so, again, just allowing the gender to come through again. And now that I was like fully, deeply on my spiritual path, and I had started doing this practice with one of my mentors, Danielle Dulski, or this was inspired by something I did with her. I can't remember for sure. In these dark days of winter, really allowing the vision to come forward, right? Letting the darkness illuminate what's within. And I can't remember if this is something I did with her or if I came up with on my own, but I began to sit in these dark days in December, late December, and just sit with the vision, and specifically around this pregnancy, right? So I asked multiple questions, but a lot of them were around this pregnancy, this baby, this birth, etc., and allowing myself to tap fully into that inner guidance and that inner knowing and the things that are within, right? And it is amazing when you really allow yourself to go there. This is not something that, obviously, this is something that I've been doing like for years and honing it and getting louder and louder and louder, because it does take that. It's a practice. And so by doing this practice, by going more deeply, by doing it over and over again and learning to hear and learning to trust what I'm hearing, feeling, knowing, sensing, is a whole nother level. And so, man, this is a lot. This is a lot for me to put out there. Like, I feel like I'm getting really vulnerable, and I am, because we don't trust this wisdom in our society. And to come out and say this, especially when I'm not like surrounded by a lot of spiritual people, and maybe you can feel this, like, man, like, what do people think? And it doesn't matter, because this is your own inner guidance. But that is why it feels so vulnerable right now, because I'm putting this all out there, because I know how powerful it is. I have literally lived it. And so I did this practice while I was pregnant with my third. And for 12 days, I sat in the darkness and I received the vision, and I asked the questions and I received the answers, and it helped with so much. At this point, I hadn't know, like, I knew it was a boy. It was interesting because I don't know, I had this idea that I was going to have a girl before I got pregnant, but then the knowing hit and I'm like, I'm having a boy. And there was a little bit of like, okay, I thought I was going to have a girl, but I'm having a boy type of thing that I had to work through. And I had to prepare my daughter for too. And so I sat with like, okay, like solidifying that, like, am I having a boy or a girl? Like asking in different ways and just using this time to really solidify that knowing. And then asking questions around the birth, like, how's it going to go? What do I need to know? When is he going to come? Like, how long is labor going to last? Really refining. And then I also used it to like meet him. And to meet him in the sense of like, who is he? Like, that's something I didn't like. when you're carrying your child, you know who they are, right? You get a sense of who they are when they're already in your womb and you haven't even met them out in the world yet. You're carrying them and you have a sense of who they are. This is something felt, but it just like intuitively known, but it's also something that I've observed in like their movement patterns and things. And it's like we had with my daughter, the list of names was, man, we could not come up with a girl name. We had such a long list of potential names when she was born. And we had kind of honed it down to like a few of them. But when we met, and I kind of knew who she was, but the birth all really illuminated who she was. And I'm like, none of these are right. And we came up with a new name. And that's how she was named. And with my second, I had very few boy names that I was like set on, and one that I loved, and the middle name was more fluid, and I was really pushing for one, and my husband was like, I wasn't sure, and then like all went down, and he's like, yep, that's the one. And so, being able to listen to that, we don't do that in our modern world. Like, we have the gender reveal parties and the baby showers, and we decorate the nurseries, and we have to know what we're having, and we pick the name out before, and it just isn't the way that is the most meaningful. Like, we have made this is like a very new thing for humans, and it's not how we find, it's how we have decided to find meaning in this modern world. But man, there is deeper meaning accessible if we can surrender to remaining more open and not needing to know all the answers, to listening to going with that feeling. Like, if we don't get stuck in this like idea of like the name and decorating the nursery in a certain way, like, we can open up to who they are. Who is your baby? Like, listen to who they are when they're in your womb and in your birth process, and when you meet them, and remain open to the name that is meant for them and that is right for them. And so we did that to an extent with the first two, but with the third one, like, that became part of my like seership in my 12 days of darkness, 12 nights of seeing in the dark, and asking like, what is your name and what is the right name for you? And getting to like leading up to that, getting to know his personality, like feeling into it, and doing it more so than like with my previous ones. I just did it in the daily basis. Yes. And I did that with the third too, but then just sitting even more and like receiving imagery around who he was. And I literally in one night recall seeing his face. And then when I met him in the world, it was so wild to me because he looked so different than my other two, almost like a stranger. And yet I'd seen his face before. And it was amazing. Like, man, that is just, it was just an amazing experience to see his face in my vision, and then to look at him when he was born and be like, yes, you are a stranger and I've known you before. Like, it was a wild experience. And two, with his name, like, I wouldn't say it was a natural name for me to choose, but it was the right name for him, right? Like, it wasn't anything that I could just like logically pull in my mind, like, I like this name and that's the name you're getting. No, like, this was the name that he had chosen, that I sat with night after night, asking, like, getting to know who he was, asking for name, asking in all sorts of different ways, and like receiving like one night, like, yes, the name begins with this letter, like, and it's just wild, the validation and the things that can come through. Like, plenty of this was just felt in the daily, but that time where I just sat in the dark and asked these questions was like really like clarifying. It really honed it in. It really validated what I was already receiving intuitively in pregnancy that just naturally came through. And yeah. Okay, and so that was the other thing I was going to talk about. So now coming back to the fact that I was being my own guide, right? I did not have a midwife or an OB for that matter, and I was good with it because I had this practice that confirmed like it was the right path. This practice that offered me things that I couldn't have known, like to be able to know things before you encounter them, right? To be able to know when he was going to come. I was down to like a 3-day window and it was right. And to be able to know, like, I looked back at my notes and yes, like the labor, I asked like how long labor would be. I asked for what labor would be like, and the message I received was like exactly how it was. And like to be able to go into labor like we go into labor, and like, you know, you don't know how long it's going to be. If you're in the medical industrial complex and you are put on the timeline, then you grow to expect it to go a certain way. But then to be able to like receive every labor is different, and to be able to receive what yours is going to be like, and know going in, know as in sense, which then means if you can do this, you can allow yourself to surrender to that knowing. So it's not like, oh, I know this, but I know it. Like, I know that I can just like surrender to it. I can rest in it. I can just be in it, versus like, oh, it's just going to be this way. Like, yeah, it's going to be however many hours and I'm going to be done. Like, it's not like this concrete, rigid thing. It is more, okay, I know that it's going to be this way and I can just settle in for it. And so I did. And my window that I'd put for labor that I had written down was what it was. Like, I had to kind of like, I don't know, nothing is like concrete, but like I know approximately when labor started and when it ended, but then I also know approximately when active labor started and when it ended. And those were like the two numbers I had written down. And so just why, like, it is still so wild to me, like how true this stuff, how true of information you can source from within if you hone this skill. And what was the other? I feel like yes, that was the other thing. So coming back to being my own guide in labor and knowing those things going in, surrendering, coach myself through this labor. And I had like received in my nights of seership, like symbols and guides that I put up in my birth space with me to remind me like of the things I received, to remind myself that I can do this, that I had confirmation that this is the right way and it was going to go down right. And like, there wasn't anything I needed to be worried about. And man, it was was it challenging? Yes. Was it beautiful beyond words? And I certainly don't think I would have been able to do it without this experience. But the level, like the depth that came with my third pregnancy, my third child, my third birth is a whole nother level, because I have developed this spiritual practice, trusted my intuition, and honed my inner knowing and my ability to see things that don't make sense logically, but are totally explained by just, the things that you feel and what lies within. And it doesn't have to be explained, because you're the only one who can know what is right for you. And when we outsource that to another power, we are not in our power, and we are not getting the depth and the richness of the human experience that we have accessible to us. And this was about, like, coming back to, this is a feminine ability. We have this within us, and it is illuminated. It is amplified in pregnancy, in birth, and postpartum. And it is still there even outside of that. But the fact that pregnancy, this evidence, right? It's undeniable. And when you build that up, like I have built up so much. This is just what I've shared with you today is predominantly just as relates to birthing babies, but we as women birth our creations too, right? And we have within us, like, what is meant for us, what we are here to create, whether that is babies, where I built up all this evidence of, like, I know things that logic can't possibly begin to explain, but I know things and they are right. Like, I have the evidence that it all came true. It all came into play. And to begin to build up that evidence for yourself, to begin to hone this skill, whether not just for having babies, but for everything that you do in life and who you're becoming and the choices you make and the path that you walk. And when you can get to the place that you can follow this, that you can hear those nudges, that you can go within when you don't know the answers, and you can begin to let them come through, and you choose that over what your logical mind tells you, then you begin walking a path that is more true to you, and a path, man, to feel this magic that is alive when what is within becomes real and alive outside of you. Like, that is magic, right? And so to allow yourself to begin to invite this in, to stop placing logic over more value, that, like, feeling and intuition and just that inner knowing, and to stop outsourcing your power to to outside authorities who will tell you the way it is, when you know inside what is meant for you. And so I won't keep rambling. I think that about sums up what I have to say. But I will leave you with, I am in the middle of hosting 12 nights of Seeing in the Dark on honing this ability. And this is something I do each year in December, and you're invited to join me. If you find this podcast later, then know that I will again be offering this each December in line with the Yule. And then I also offer that this leads into my year-end vision quest for honoring where you've been this past year and all that you've experienced and all of what you've become, beginning to receive that vision of who you're becoming next, of what is to come in the year ahead, naming your guiding oracles, your guiding symbols, your themes for the year ahead that will walk with you and keep you walking this path that is meant for you. And then beginning to step into that person that you're becoming, beginning to embody her, your next level. So we are always growing and changing. Year after, so many seasons and cycles of life that are inviting us to step closer to who we are, to come closer to our true nature. And each year, each turning of the year, we are invited to continue to walk this journey. Whether you do it the year end, you do it in line with your birthday, it's a year of becoming, right? Every year we're becoming someone new. Every year we're having new experiences. Every year we're walking towards something that's new for us. And being able to be guided by what lies within on what wants to emerge, who we're next becoming, and what's meant for us. What path are we meant to walk? Instead of all the latest fads and trends and the just standard New Year's resolutions that everyone does, right? Thinking outside the box and getting in touch with what is lying within that wants to be alive in your life and what wants to be born within you, right? So what are you giving birth to in this coming year? And so that's what we do in this year-end program. So 12 nights of seeing in the dark is kind of, it's honing that skill. It's beginning to receive the vision, and it goes hand in hand with my year-end vision quest, where we honor the whole cycle, right? Where we've been, where we are now, and what's coming through, and where we're going. Honoring, grieving, celebrating, receiving the vision, and then beginning to walk the path. I appreciate you bearing with me. I hope that you got just what you needed out of this very vulnerable share, right? If you didn't notice, I got emotional. Like, holy shit, I'm not kidding you. That third birth was pregnancy and birth was transformative because I had these tools, because I had developed this practice. And the same is true for whatever you birth in your life. Like, it gets to be this good, and it gets to be this deep, and it gets to be this meaningful and fulfilling if we allow it and we detach from the outside authorities who have been dictating the path that we walk, and we instead begin to walk our own path that we have lit up from within. And so I hope that you will, whether you take something from this podcast or you join me for 12 nights of seeing in the dark or my year-end vision quest and going deeper with this work and learning to really do it yourself, I hope that you begin to develop this, to allow this, your feminine intuition to be honed and developed, that you listen to it a little more loudly, and that you begin to, and you let it change your life. And yeah, I will gather around with you next time. Bye.